What's good, everyone? My name is Jacob Moses, and welcome to another episode of the Not Boring Tech Writer, where in each episode we focus on a different skill that you can learn to enhance your skill set, improve your marketability, diversify your career, and ultimately break the stereotype that technical writing is a boring career. This episode's skill: creating usability tests for your organization. Technical writers must ensure their help resources, such as documentation and video tutorials, are useful for their users. Therefore, they study language, design, and support tickets to gather all the context they need to ensure users can accomplish their task. But get this: through feedback loops such as quizzes and interviews with subject matter experts, you can create usability tests that transform the way in which you measure the effectiveness of your documentation. That's why in this episode, we have Mariana Morea on the podcast, tech writer at Zoop Innovation and community manager of Brazil's budding TechCom community, Tech Writing BR. Joining us as well is Jared Doran at Knowledge Owl to discuss usability tests from a knowledge based company's perspective as well. In this episode, you'll learn everything you need to know to begin creating usability tests for your organization. Enjoy. Hey there, Mariana. How are you?
Hey, I'm fine, Jacob. What about you?
I'm doing well, thank you. Thank you so much for joining us on another episode of The Not Boring Tech Writer. How is life in Sao Paulo, Brazil?
You mean now?
Yeah,
It's okay. The forecast today is good. It's not too hot and not too cold,
good.
which I think it's nice.
I'm glad. That's a nice feeling. I've had the pleasure to get to know a handful of folk in the Brazilian TechCom community these past few months, most recently, and I think y'all are buddies, at least per your LinkedIn feeds, but Mr. Breno Barreto? Is that
I know
yeah,
him.
over at the Manuscript podcast, another fantastic tech writing podcast that I've really enjoyed listening to these days. He's a buddy of yours.
Yes, he is. Actually, he's one of the managers of the Tech Writing BR community, which is the community. I'm a community manager nowadays. So yeah, we're kind of colleagues.
That's cool. That's cool. I know later on in the episode we'll get to talk a lot about the Brazilian tech comp community. I know you guys have a lot of good stuff going on that I'm excited to chat about. And then we're also here with Mr. Jared Doran out of Knowledge Owl. Jared, how are you tonight?
Hello again. I'm doing very well, thanks. Although it's the morning for me,
True.
but yes, I'm doing very well. I'm very glad to be back.
Yeah, we're scattered all over. I think 7
hmm
p.m. here in Texas. Is it 9 in Sao Paulo, Mariana?
No, actually now it's 7 p.m.
Oh, 7 all over. Oh, 5 here in Texas. I'm silly. My mind's all over the place.
And I'm coming to you from the future,
Yes.
for 9 o'clock in the morning.
Yes. Saturday
In
morning.
Melbourne.
That's great. Well, Mariana, thank you again for joining us. Really excited to learn more about your career. Fairly new into the TechCom game, but despite only being 9 months in, already leading a great example of how tech writers can quickly ramp up their skills. And then specifically today, we'll talk a little bit about all the great skill sets you've brought into your tech writing career, learning a few new ones as well, talk a little bit about usability tests, and then also the value of joining and or building a TechCom community. Super excited. To get us started, Mariana, I would love just to learn a little bit about you. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and what got you into the TechCom game?
Of course. First of all, I just would like to thank you one more time for this opportunity. I followed the podcast for a while, and when you invited me, I was like, "Oh my God, such an honor!" Really, really.
Good. That's very sweet, Mariana. Thank you.
No, thank you. I'm really glad. My name is Mariana. I'm a Brazilian technical writer working for Zoop Innovation, which is a tech
Mm.
company in Brazil who's now investing on open source initiatives, which is exactly what I work today. So I take care of our technical documentations for our open source projects.
Mm.
Then I started my career as a journalist. I graduated here in São Paulo, and as soon as I graduated, I made my first career shift into digital marketing, especially content marketing and inbound marketing, which allows me to learn more about content creation for social media, for blog, SEO, and planning content. And literally, I made like a 360. I had the
Yeah.
opportunity to work with a little bit of everything in an agency. And I spent like the last 3 years, almost four, working for digital marketing agencies. I started in the digital marketing field, and then I spent like the last 3, almost 4 years working in this field until last year, which I was working as a social media manager in an advertising agency in Brazil. And when I realized that I wasn't happy, I was working with something which I was recognized as a good
Mm,
professional, but I really wasn't feeling like the type of writing and the type of creative I have was really being well used.
mm,
And then I understood that was the moment I had to do another career shift and look
yeah.
for something that I really could be more, something that I really would like to work with. So
Mhm.
that was the moment when I found out about UX writing and all these, digital writing focus on products. And then I made this risky move to quit my job and start working as a freelancer while I was studying about UX writing field and everything I needed to learn and to know more about until I start working with it. And that was the moment actually I had the first contact with communities,
Mm,
because in Brazil we have a strong UX writing community. And with this community, I had the opportunity to join some meetups and to know people, and to share experiences until I managed to do this career shift. And then I became a UX writer. We're talking about October of last year, so
wow.
it's quite recent. But
Sure.
Mm.
at the same time, I was working as a UX writer. I received the contact of my current company, which is Zoop, on LinkedIn, inviting me to participate in their process because they were hiring on a UX writer. And then we started talking, and then this hiring happened, and I moved to Zoop. But that's that's the plot twist of my story, because at the moment I moved to Zoop, yes, at the moment I moved to Zoop, I started actually working with them and with the product teams. I realized that I wasn't doing any more UX writing, but I had no clue of what I was doing actually.
Jared, I feel like your story is comparable.
Well, I'm sitting here and I'm thinking, Mariana, I'm thinking that I really identify with your story because I also came to the sort of I'm not really in tech comms. I work for a knowledge based platform, but there's a lot of similar elements. And I also didn't start in that arena at all. I actually, my most recent job before this was I came from doing internal communications at the University of Edinburgh. So I can hear you when you say, you were working in communications, and when you move into this arena, it can definitely be quite daunting. Did you feel a bit sort of? I was scared, to be totally honest, because I just didn't have the vocabulary or the experience. How was it for you coming into such a new arena?
Well, that's funny because at the time I was, living all these feelings, I didn't realize all the dimension of that, because when I entered at Zoop, we were at the moment we are, starting to launching our open source products. So I really had no time to think about it. I had to learn how
Mm,
to document and start writing their technical documentations until the launch.
hmm.
And it's quite, how can I say, it's quite funny because only recently I started thinking about it, about how I had this courage and this nonsense maybe to start working with something really, to start working with something I had no idea how to work with. And I managed to deliver these documentations. And really, guys, I have no idea actually. But
Yeah.
what I think that what really helped me was to understand that I was a journalist, that I am a communicator, and that I have already some tools that I could manage to adapt to this new reality. There's this analogy that I really like to use. That is, in our career, we have this toolbox where we put all the hard and soft skills, and
Sure.
that we learn with experience and time. And with technical writing, I really tried to use all these skills while I was learning about the field. So, for example, when I started the documentations, I was already an UX writer. So that allowed me to, for example, use some information architecture strategies to organize the documentation, to see the menu, if the readability was fine, with the information was really useful or well written to be understandable, the taxonomy also, the user experience as all, and especially the empathy to work with developers, because that was the first time I
Sure.
was really facing them.
What was your experience of working with developers for the first time?
Wow, I had the previous experience with working with developers for sorry, not software development, website development, when
Right.
I was working with marketing. But
Hmm.
now it was quite different because I was literally trying to speak their language. At
Mm.
the first time was quite scary. I remember that my first meetings, all the time, I left them with headache because it was quite tough
Yeah.
to get used to these expressions like API or deploy,
Sure.
Yeah.
build. But I nowadays I joke that I'm like their psychologist, because I realize that some developers really, I realize that some developers, they do want to work with technical writers, but sometimes they can maybe feel scared because I don't know, they have this belief that maybe when we are looking for their code or for everything they're documented so far, we're gonna I don't know, we're gonna say, this is wrong, this is an absurd, and that's not the purpose. When we look for some development job, our goal is to just to make that information more accessible. It's not
Sure.
about to how can I say this in English, it's not about to invalidate their job, their their work so far.
Yeah,
it's
of course.
it's just about to make this richer.
That's a great point, Marianne. We're all working towards the same goal, towards
Exactly.
creating a better product. And sure, for the developer, that end goal that they might be envisioning is the product or service itself. But, the tech writer complements that well, where, we focus on the documentation. Let's make sure that this great product or service our colleagues developed is usable, that if they do encounter challenges and obstacles, that there's some thorough, robust help resources to help guide them throughout whatever it was that was developed. I want to flash back a little bit. You said something very interesting in the beginning about you were working as a journalist, but there was a point where you felt like you weren't necessarily having the best use of your writing skills, and you looked to techcom, which fascinates me because for a lot of people outside of the techcom industry, they think the opposite. They think that techcom is a boring use of their writing skills, so they don't get to use that cadence and prose and all the great things that initially attract them to
Mhm.
writing. Why? I'm curious because I feel the same way. I'm sure Jared does well.
Hmm.
Um, but we often see the opposite, and I'm curious what attracted you to TechCom in terms of having to be a platform to really use your writing skills.
I don't know why. Maybe for some people it's destiny, maybe it's just coincidence. But I believe that all my life I was being prepared to be a technical writer. I came from a family, I'm the youngest from four brothers, actually, three
Hmm.
sisters and one brother, and I'm the youngest. And all my family is formed by lawyers. So
Oh.
I was raised by lawyers, and I spent all my adolescence and childhood listening to process discussion during dinner. So this formal language was something that I was really used to. I
Sure.
remember that when I was a kid, I learned some difficult words, even in Portuguese. And I
Mm.
remember kids from from a school saying things like, "We can't understand what you say because you speak too formal."
Ha.
And really, really, that happened.
I can so identify with that because I had exactly the same thing when I was younger. I was so interested in writing, in words generally, and when I was in primary school, my peers used to ask me, "Did you eat a dictionary?" Because I used to love using like new words that I'd learned. Like I read a lot, so and I think at the beginning people make you feel a little bit like you're showing off, and really you're just showing your love of words. I'll
Sure.
never forget that when I worked in PR, public relations, for the first time. Um, I had to do a sort of test at the beginning of my employment where they asked me to write a small amount of marketing copy for a particular sort of imaginary client. And after I'd finished it, I handed it over to the person who was running it, and she read it and she said, "You really like words, don't you?" And I said, "Oh yeah, I love words." She's like, "We're going to drum that out of you." Because she thought that what I'd written was way too flowery, way too like prose. She was like, it needs to be sort of utilitarian, marketing copy. It needs to be a lot sort of duller than this. And I remember thinking, oh no, I want to love words. I want to do the best words. Um, but I think it's about sort of channeling that love towards a particular purpose, which I think that you sound like you've done very well.
Wow, that's interesting to see how our stories are connected somehow. It's quite, I don't know, it's quite like destiny maybe.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. We've definitely had a similar path into the same field.
Totally, totally. That's really interesting.
You told us some great stories about all the great skills you've acquired since you got into the tech com field. And I just have this list written to my right on my desk, and SEO, UX, content marketing, really fantastic suite of skills you developed. I'd love to talk about the latest one you've just started working on, and that is usability tests. And I imagine a lot of people who are familiar with TechCom, of course, they want their documentation to be useful. They might think about, language, visuals, design elements, stuff like that. But I know you're really starting to actually get your hands into usability tests for your employer. Will you tell us a little bit about what this process has been like for you for the short time that you've begun exploring it for Zoop?
Of course. Well, in our case, let's say that our usability tests are making baby steps actually, because I don't remember if I mentioned before, but I am the first technical writer at Zoop.
Wow.
And after me,
Ah.
yes,
Congratulations. Love that.
thank you, thank you. And after me, I had Jessica, which is my partner,
Hmm.
but besides us there are there are no technical writers,
Mm,
so it's quite challenging because we really want to do lots of things. We really want to build knowledge management culture at the company and everything related to it, but
yeah,
we're still I'm still trying to respect my process and my time to understand that
sure.
one step at another. But talking about the usability tests, we started with a form. Actually, at Soup, we have these onboarding that is like a gamification, where we receive these new developers who are going to working with us, and we introduce them into our products. As I said,
Mm,
they are open source projects. We have some enterprise products, but I'm not related to them. I work especially with the open source products. Sorry, guys. And in these onboardings, we try to test how useful our documentations are. So we created some kind of challenges, which are basically some tasks that we ask them to do while they are learning about our products during this
yeah.
onboarding. And after their tasks, when they finished, we always ask them about the level of difficulty they had during the tasks. So if it
Mm,
was very difficult, not difficult, neither easy, very easy, and or easy. And we
Sure.
sometimes try this NPS, which measures the satisfaction level. So basically, these two types of usability tests we tried at Zoop. But the first of all, let's say it's more common because with these tests, for example, we realized that our installation page was not so useful. So we reduced the text and we put more codes, and then it became more useful. Um, let's see if I remember more examples. But in general, let's say that our usability test helped us to understand how usable the documentation was and what else we could improve in our in general. So if we needed to put more words, if we needed to contextualize more, or maybe if we needed to put more code because it was too much explanation and less and less API and less code. So the usability test really helps us in this way. We had already the scenario where we could become the experience easier.
Yeah.
For example, we have one of our products is Beagle, which is a server-driven UI framework, and it's open source. And we had the satisfaction to realize that we were promoting a good doc experience because
Yeah.
when we run, I don't remember if it was the second or the third onboarding, but we have this Google Sheet where we collect all the answers because in
Right.
this form we have the multiple choice questions, but we have the open questions so people can write all the impressions they had about the documentation, which is amazing
Mm.
because we can collect some interesting insights. And I remember that we received a feedback from a junior dev, and he said something like, I really like the doc because for me, who's just starting, it was easy to understand what I have to do and everything about the product. And for me as a tech writer, that was amazing because
Yeah.
when I started at Zoop, and as I said, they haven't a technical writer before me, some developers had the idea that everything was too obvious. So when we started
Mm.
documenting, we started writing the documentation. I remember I was writing some explanations, and they were like, "No, this is too easy. This is too obvious. Every iOS developer knows that." And I was like,
Yeah.
"So the point is, in our job, obvious it's a danger word because there's nothing
Sure.
that is obvious."
Huh.
Yeah. I'm sitting
Yeah,
here smiling. I'm sitting here smiling because I have had exactly the same thing. Like when I started doing sort of a peer writing project for the devs where I was working, there was a lot of attitude from those devs that was like, but that's way too simple. Like there's no like they seem to have this idea that because I'm a layperson and I'm sort of trying to translate their sort of technical language that it should be written for someone of their level. And the challenge is in making them see that actually the ultimate the ultimate thing you want to do is to make it simple and understandable for the layperson, because
Sure.
then it caters to all levels of ability in this particular sort of field. So I've definitely had some experience with receiving resistance to that particular process as well.
well, I guess it's quite common, huh?
Yeah.
And then considering where the user is coming from, Mariana, thanks to all the great work you and your team are doing with these usability tests, I imagine they're feeling a great sense of accomplishment. Whether it is an experienced iOS developer or maybe someone new in the game, to know that there was a tech writing team. I know it's just you and your you and your one colleague, but really taking the time to understand what their struggles are, whether it's the definition of a particular term, maybe where they can find an endpoint in the documentation. To know that there's a tech writer like you that actually thought through all that and want to make that documentation more effective for them, I imagine it's quite empowering for the user. It reminds me of my time as a tech writer where we used to not have any kind of feedback loop for our documentation. So we ended up having just this barrier of feedback. We were putting out a lot of documentation, a lot of video tutorials, but since we didn't have any way for people to get feedback, we think we're making the best documentation in the game. Despite, once we did open up some feedback, learning that there were several ways in which we could improve. I'm curious, throughout this process, specifically getting feedback from these developers, what has it taught you about the value of feedback when it comes to creating software documentation?
Well, I believe that the feedback is like um, it's the main reason where we can continue improving our job. Especially in my case, where I work with open source, it's quite of mandatory that I have to have feedbacks, especially because the community will bring these feedbacks.
Sure.
For
Yeah.
example, we had this. Recently, one of our products was mentioned in a streaming, in a code streaming. I don't remember the guy who made the streaming, but one of our devs shared with him the project, and he opened on live. He opened the project and opened the documentation, and I was like, "Oh my god, what is he gonna say?" Guys, literally, there were more than 1,000 people online at the time he opened the documentation, and he was quite, he was quite amazing because he opened and he was so comprehensible. He read the project and he read the documentation, and on live, he was like, "Oh, I like it that I like this context on the documentation. Oh, I saw some errors of writing that maybe you can improve, but it's okay. You just have to do something. You do that or that to improve and to
Sure.
correct the phrase and the paragraphs." It's interesting because on open source culture, it's really common to have feedbacks and to have this documentation culture. While I was preparing for this talk, I remember about a speech from a doc advocate from Google. I don't know if you guys know her. It's Erin McKay, and she has this amazing job with Google because she's a developer whose work is especially to advocate about good practices on documentation on open source projects. There are some data that I really like to bring when we're talking about documentation culture, especially in open source, because it really shows us how documentation is important when it comes to user experience in open source products. One of them that I really like to say is this GitHub 2017 survey, which says that 90% of the developers who were surveyed said that incomplete or outdated doc is a pervasive problem in open source. There's
Wow.
another data who says that lack of documentation was the top reason some developers gave for deciding against an open source project. So when it
Hmm.
comes to open source, documentation is literally the best friend of the product. So there is no way when you're talking about this type of product and this type of project without considering doing best practices of documentation. I know that when it comes to enterprise, maybe it's not the same. Maybe there are some, like Gerard said, some resistances. But I still believe that when it comes to documentation, it's really an opportunity that companies are not looking at. It's one way to improve your user experience in this contact with the customer. I usually say in the speeches I do in some events in Brazil that when you invest time in doing great tech content and great documentation, you show to your customer that you really care about them. And you're not
Sure.
just someone who opens, customer tickets on your help center because you really thought about the doubts that he might have with your product, and you're anticipated then in the documentation. So it's really something related also with case deflection.
Marianne, you are hitting on so many important notes for tech
Hmm.
writers, both new and existing. And listeners, if you're curious, we have a suite of existing episodes that complements all the points that Mariana just hit. Specifically, there's one about just-in-time documentation that we'll put a link to in the show notes. And then also, whenever Mariana was discussing about, the best way to approach a developer and to work with them to help you not only create better documentation, but to help the developer feel heard and feel like they can contribute to docs as well. We have another great episode in the show notes that'll give you a good inside scoop on that as well. Mariana, I'm curious. You came in as Zoop's very first tech writer. Did they have existing documentation that you were tasked to, improve the usability of it, or were you just having to create all new documentation from the start?
Luckily, they had something when I entered, so they were already working with a documentation. But and I think that Gerard will understand me because the documentation was really too much devy, you know.
Mm,
Yeah,
They had something documented, but the documentation was like too technical and too formal, and sometimes wasn't thinking about the reader. It's when
yeah,
we when you are working and then you have some idea and you open your note block and then no, I read something and then I'll see later. The documentation was like that. they
sure,
they they
hmm,
developed a feature, they wrote about it, but they didn't come back to see if what they write about that functionality was really understandable, was
mm,
written. There wasn't this look considering the needs of the customer, the client, the reader, the person who might be interested in use that project.
sure,
So yeah, they had already some documentation, but it wasn't really customer first or user first.
sure. Well, I hope that's empowering for listeners because many of our listeners are students, people that want to get into tech com and haven't yet, mostly because they may feel intimidated by learning new technologies. But as we hear with your story, Mariana, with a background in journalism, mess with more of the content marketing game, but because you understand the end goal of the product and aren't too caught up in, maybe some of the jargon or the exact terminology you're supposed to use, end up being a beneficial perspective for actually improving Zoop's documentation.
Well, thank you. One thing I really like to say, actually, this is not come from me. It comes, by the way, from Breno Barreto, from the podcast you just
Mm-hmm.
mentioned at the beginning. He likes to say that one of our skills as technical writers is to learn how to learn and learn how to share. And I
Mm,
truly believe on that. I think I like to say that as a technical writer, I'm like a puzzle player who have different pieces, and I have the mission to understand which type of pieces I'm holding and how to get them together in order to build a puzzle where someone who doesn't have a clue about what I'm doing see this puzzle finished and see, oh, okay, Mari, now I got it. I got it. This is the problem X, and makes that.
yeah.
I really think about it because I know that's maybe an interesting approach to say how tech writing is not boring, but I really think our field is magical because it's truly challenging to put yourself in the place of the user who are going to use that product and to challenge yourself to understand many concepts and expressions that are very particular to that product or that software, but you somehow manage to write them in a way that everybody or most of people will understand. So I really
hmm.
believe that it's not boring, it's fascinating.
Absolutely. I think part of the reason, I mean, obviously, I can't speak for all developers, but part of the reason why you experience some resistance from them when you're trying to sort of translate very jargon filled documentation or stuff that feels very high level, there's a sense of pride I've found that sometimes these developers have where if you were to simplify it, it sort of makes it less impressive or something, or they feel sort of criticized by you coming in and trying to, uh, amend their content to be more user friendly. But really, it's just about accessibility. You just want it to be available to sort of the layperson or someone who's just coming into the company from the start. And I think part of the work we have to do is to show that it's not a critique of their particular process or the copy that's already been produced, but just a sort of a tweaking so that it's available for more people. It can be hard to get past, I think.
Yeah, I agree because it's really a change of mindset. I now I believe that we hopefully are facing a moment where developers recognize our value, especially in Brazil. Our feed
Mm,
nowadays, as I said, I'm a recent technical writer, but in Brazil we are facing a moment when finally people are getting to know us as as professionals and as documentation specialists. because in this journey of get to knowing more about technical writing, I really met some amazing people, technical writers who already working 10 years, 5 years, 7 years, and most of them were really discouraged because they haven't the opportunity to meet each other and to have this space where they could, share experiences and, you know share these difficulties and challenges we have in our career, and
Sure.
to recognize each other as, technical writers. For you guys to have some idea, in Brazil there are some companies who use another terms to define a technical writer, and there are some technical writers who didn't know they were technical writers.
True.
They were working with Techcom, but they didn't realize that the term was technical writing or technical writer. And I'm happy to see that developers and other professionals in this technology ecosystem in Brazil are finally getting us a chance to show our job, to show our value, and especially letting us to be more and more companies. So opening, job roles and making events, and giving us the chance to show how technical writing can be useful in Brazilian companies.
Yes, it's so important to have a tribe. No matter the field, whether you're, in UX or developer, tech com, we got to feel like we have some kinfolk that, share the same challenges or have the same goals for their career. I'm curious to learn more about this Brazilian tech com community. Can you tell us a little bit about it and the specific ventures that you've been able to participate in the Brazilian tech com community?
Of course. Our community was born really in a simple way because, as I said, at the moment I realized I was a technical writer, which was quite funny. I can tell the story later. But no, really. Oh, guys, really, my journey was really with this plot twist because, okay, I'll tell now.
I bet
First
you can't leave
Yeah,
us
yeah,
hanging
yeah. Go
now.
for it.
No, no, okay, I'll say it. The first time I heard that I was a technical writer, I was in a meeting with the CEO of the company I work with, and my ex boss literally said, "Oh, that's Mari, and she's our technical writer." And I was like, "Okay, yes, I'm the tech writer." And with me, I was like, "Okay, I do this, but I have no idea what the hell is that."
Yep,
Just
that's
nod,
me.
Marty.
Yeah, that's me. Oh, okay, I'm the tech writer. Okay, yeah, that's me. I can be this one. But at the moment I realized that what I doing had a name, and this name was technical writer. As I said, I started, looking for some professionals in Brazil, doing some researches on LinkedIn to find these profiles. And that's the moment I met Breno Barreto and Juliana Meyer, who are the co-hosts for the Manuscript podcast, which was the podcast Jacob already participated.
Mhm.
And when we meet each other, we started, talking. Ben was a kind of mentor for me because he presented me to the Not Boring Tech Writer podcast. He showed me some blogs, some profiles on Medium, the Write the Docs community, and everything, that already exists in our ecosystem. And then we became some kind of colleagues. And one day I had the idea to organize an event to reunite us all, just to talk and to get to know each other, to know where they were working, in which field, and their challenges, to start this kind of tribe, as Jacob said.
Sure.
Mhm.
And then I sent a message to him talking about this idea, and then he said, "Oh, me and Juliana are having a similar idea. What about to get, reunite this idea together, and then we, I don't know, build a community." And I was like, "Sure, I'm the first one. Where I sign." And then we started the community, just the three of us. We created a website, and some channels on LinkedIn and in the Meetup website also. And then the first event happened on the July 3rd, 30? No, 30. It's a quite of success because I remember we made our meeting on Google Meet because we were like, oh no, the limit of 100 people on Google Meet is okay because it's technical writing and people maybe we will not crowd the room. But that happened. After five
Wow.
minutes of the event, we accomplished 100 people, 100 of
Wow,
technical writers
Mariana.
watching our
Wow,
event. It was amazing, really.
that's so good.
It was amazing. It was an amazing feeling, really. I really felt like a movie was passing through my mind.
Mm.
And I was like, oh my God, this is so amazing. Because when I started, I had no idea. And then now we had the opportunity to really get connected with one another around Brazil because we have people from the South region, we're people from Rio, Sao Paulo. We also have a tech writer from Argentina. So now we're maybe extending our contact to Latin America. So it really is amazing. And we had
Mm.
yesterday the second event, yesterday, like October 22.
Hmm.
Mariana, say there's a tech writer out there listening to this episode. They enjoy their work, they're inspired by it, but they kind of feel isolated in the job. Maybe they're like you, where there's only one or two tech writers in their organization, and they don't feel like they have that tribe. What few words of encouragement would you have for them um, about why they should consider trying to find that community like you have found in Brazil?
I think that's normal to feel lonely and to feel a little insecure, uh, especially when it comes to a field that it's not so common. I know that in US and maybe in other countries in Europe and in US it's more popular. People talk more about tech home, but in Brazil I know it's we're doing our job to get more
Sure.
popular. But when it comes to technical writing, I know it's not too popular, such as UX writing or content marketing, for example. But there is a tribe out there. So if you're hearing this and you're feeling like there is no one like me doing the same thing I'm doing, trust me, there is. Maybe this person doesn't know yet that what she's doing is technical writing, but
Sure.
you will find this person because when I started, I really had no clue of where to start my researches. And then I use Google, I use LinkedIn, I use every social media I could manage to find these people, and I found them. On our profile on Meetup, we are more than 100. And on our WhatsApp group, we are, let me check. I guess we are almost 60, but I will check
Wow.
now. Let me see. Update, we are more than 60.
Wow.
So if you're hearing this and you're feeling like you won't find anyone, trust me, you will. Because luckily we live in a place and it's great. We live in a society now that truly has this culture of network and tribes. And especially in technology, I see that this behavior is quite common to build communities, to build tribes, and to try to increase these talks, this conversation. So yeah, take a breath, believe that you find these people, and start looking because luckily you find and you find quickly.
Mariana, what a lovely message. And you were joking earlier on in the podcast about being a psychologist for your developers. I'm kind of feeling that vibe now. I'm feeling
Mm,
refreshed and calm
definitely. It's a
listening
very
to your.
beautiful message.
It is, and I hope it's very inspiring for listeners. And as Mariana said, a lot of great folk out there doing great community building in TechCom, right? The
And
docs,
crucially,
Brazil.
if you're in Brazil and you're a tech writer and you're hearing this and you're thinking it's only me, well, actually, there's a community growing in Brazil, and you should go and contact them.
Over 100 folk and growing. Well, Mariana, this has been an absolute joy. Thank you for taking the time to share your experience with us, your skills. I'm inspired. I'm sure Jared is as well. If anyone wants to connect with you online, either personally or through these great community groups that you've mentioned, could you share a few sites that we can include in the show notes for people to connect with you all?
Of course, on my professional social media, I currently write on my LinkedIn profile. I started a job, writing content in Portuguese about technical writing because I noticed there was a lack of information in our language. So currently, all week, I produce content about technical writing and technology as well in Portuguese on my LinkedIn profile. I also have a profile on Medium, but I must confess that I'm not been publishing there for a while. But you can find me there also. And yeah, this is my social media, but the community you can find on our website, which is techwriting.com.br. There you can find, for example, some articles we wrote about the field, who are the organizers, sorry. And also you can find more about events. And for example, if you want to be a technical writer in Brazil, we have a list of some podcasts, books, and all the content you can study.
Beautiful. Mariana, thank you. This was so much fun. Jared, you having a nice time?
Yes, it was so good and so interesting to find someone whose story is quite similar to my own. So it's lovely to hear a parallel perspective.
Guys, thank you so much. I have to say thank you because I was quite nervous. I didn't say before, but this is the first time I'm recording a podcast. So I was like, oh my God, did I manage to talk, slowly and comprehensible? But I'm really glad that I had this time with you. I really love it. And I hope that your listeners, Jacob, enjoy it.
It's been a real pleasure for us too.
Thank you, Mariana. Talk soon, Mariana. Enjoy the nights.
Talk soon with you too, guys. Actually, not the night, not the evening, and maybe the morning. Okay, I'll wait
True.
for you too.
Yeah.
Bye, y'all.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks for listening, everyone. And if you enjoyed what you heard, please subscribe to the Not Boring Tech Writer on iTunes. And we'll chat soon. See ya.